All right, let's jump right in. I want you to think about the marketplace as this massive competitive game. You've got all these companies as players, and every single one is trying to win your business. But, like any good game, it needs a rule book to keep things fair. And that rule book, that's what we call competition law. It's absolutely essential to make sure the game works for everyone, not just for a handful of powerful players. So, have you ever been shopping for something, let's say a plane ticket, maybe a new phone plan, and you notice that all the prices are, well, suspiciously similar? It kind of feels like no matter where you look, you're basically getting the same deal. Well, that's not always just a coincidence. A lot of the time, it's a huge red flag that the game isn't being played fairly at all. And that's the real problem when competition just breaks down. It isn't just about a few companies making a little extra money. What it really means is that we, the customers, end up paying higher prices for stuff that's probably lower quality. It means those new, innovative companies with brilliant ideas, they get squeezed out of the market before they even get a fighting chance. When fair play disappears, believe me, everyone loses. To stop this from happening, India created its own modern rulebook, the Competition Act. But this wasn't the first shot at it. The whole philosophy behind how to regulate the market has gone through this massive shift over the years, moving away from just trying to control big companies to actively cheering on a healthy, competitive game. This timeline really tells an amazing story of a complete change in mindset. You see, back in 1969, the old law, the MRTP Act, was all about control. It basically assumed that big companies were, by default, a problem. But then, after the economic liberalization in 1991, that thinking got completely turned on its head. The new Competition Act of 2002, which came out of the Raghavan Committee's work, wasn't about punishing size anymore. It was all about promoting fair play, a total game changer. So, let's get into the actual rules of this new game. The very first one, and you could argue it's the most important, is super simple. You have to actually compete. You can't just get together with your rivals in some back room and agree not to play the game at all.
The law breaks these secret handshakes down into two main types. First, you've got your horizontal agreements. This is when direct competitors, we're talking two airlines or two cement makers, decide to collude. This is seen as the most serious foul you can commit. Then you have vertical agreements. This is between companies at different steps of the process, like a car maker telling its dealership what to do. Now, these aren't automatically illegal, but they can be if they end up hurting competition overall.
And the most notorious type of horizontal agreement is, of course, the cartel. It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like, a bunch of supposed competitors who secretly agree to act like one giant monopoly. They just stopped fighting for your business and instead work together to control the market and line their own pockets. And they pull this off in four main ways, which the Competition Act treats as the absolute cardinal sins of the marketplace. First, they fix prices. Then they limit how much they produce to create a fixed shortage. They also carve up the market, like you take the North, I'll take the South, so they don't have to compete. And finally, they rig bids for contracts, so they decide ahead of time who wins. All of these are seen as automatically illegal. No excuses. And here's a real-world textbook case of how this hurts all of us. In a massive case against cement makers, the Competition Commission discovered that companies were deliberately running their factories way below capacity. Now, why would they do that? Simple. To control the supply of cement, create an artificial shortage, and jack up the prices for everyone, building anything from a new house to a new hospital. That's output control in action. And it's not just stuff like building materials. Think about something as simple as beer. Just recently, 3 huge beer companies were found guilty of doing the exact same thing. They formed a cartel to coordinate and fix beer prices across a bunch of different states. Once again, it meant that all of us were paying more than we should have been in a fair market. Okay, so that's rule number 1. Don't team up with your rivals. But what happens when you don't even need to? What if one player gets so big, so powerful, that they can just ignore everyone else? Well, that brings us to rule number 2, taming the titans. Now, this is an absolutely crucial point. The law doesn't say being big is bad, not at all. A company can grow to be a market leader because they're innovative, they're efficient, they just have a great product. That's fine. What's illegal is when that dominant company starts to abuse its power, to unfairly crush smaller rivals or take advantage of its customers. That's the line. So how do the referees even figure this out? Well, it's a very methodical 3-step process. First, they define the playing field, what they call the relevant market. Are we talking about online search across all of India or just taxi services in one city? Step 2, they figure out if one company is truly the undisputed titan of that specific field. And only then, as the final step, do they actually look for the foul play, the abuse itself. A perfect global example of this is the massive fine the EU slapped on Google. The Commission determined that, yes, Google was dominant in online search, but the abuse was that it used that dominance to systematically give its own shopping service an illegal advantage in the search results, all while pushing down its rivals. That's a textbook case of a titan abusing its power.
All right, so the first two rules deal with bad behavior from players already in the game. But what about stopping a player from getting too powerful to begin with? This brings us to our third and final core rule, vetting the power-ups.
This part of the law is all about looking into a crystal ball. It's a proactive check on big mergers and acquisitions. The regulator, the CCI, gets to review these huge deals before they go through to see if the new combined company would have so much market power that it could just kill off competition down the road. It's about preventing a problem before it even starts.
And a case involving medical devices shows you exactly why this is so critical. When two companies, Abbott and St. Jude Medical, wanted to merge, the CCI looked at one very specific market, something called small hole vascular closure devices. What they found was that if the merger went through, the new company would control a staggering 95% of that market. That's not a competitive game anymore. That's pretty much a monopoly. But here's the thing. The goal isn't just to block deals. It's about finding smart solutions. In this case, the companies were actually able to get their merger approved, but only on one condition. They had to sell off the part of their business making those specific devices to another competitor. This way, the big merger could happen, but the market for that one product stayed competitive. It was like a surgical solution. So we have these three core rules. But who are the actual referees on the field, blowing the whistle and calling the fouls? India's system is set up in tiers. It all kicks off with the investigator, the Director General, or DG. They're the ones who gather all the facts and evidence. That report then goes up to the main referee, the Competition Commission of India, the CCI. They're the ones who hear the case and make the final call. And if a company disagrees with that decision, there's an appeals process, going first to a tribunal, the NCLAT, and then maybe even all the way to the Supreme Court. Now this is where it gets really interesting. Who can even start this whole process? Well, the CCI can launch an investigation on its own. But, and this is key, it can also act on information it gets from any person. That means you, me, any small business that feels like the game is rigged against them can actually report it and trigger a full-blown official inquiry. But of course, the game is always changing. Today, the biggest challenges for these referees aren't in old-school markets like cement or steel. They're in the incredibly fast-moving digital economy. We're talking about massive online platforms, big data, and network effects that create titans in ways the original rulebook could have never imagined. And that leaves us with a final big question. The old game was all about controlling production lines and price tags. But in this new game, data is the most valuable currency there is. So as data becomes the new gold, is the rulebook we've just gone through still good enough? Or do we need an entirely new set of rules for the digital marketplace? It's definitely something to think about.